My daughter-in-law's mother poured wine on me at the wedding, but my son just smirked until they knelt before me. The wedding was held under the old magnolia trees of the Natchez estate. I sat alone at the edge of the courtyard, adjusting the hem of my turquoise dress, the one I had worn for my husband's funeral 15 years earlier. It was the only fine dress I owned that still fit. The fabric shimmered faintly beneath the lights, too modest to compete with the champagne gowns swirling around me. I wasn't meant to stand out here. I was meant to blend into the background like wallpaper someone forgot to tear down. David, my only son, was radiant in his tailored suit, the same height as his father but with a colder jaw. Elise, his new bride, moved like a woman who thought the world owed her applause. Her mother, Virginia Carver, sat like royalty beside the head table, her pearls layered as if she could choke herself on wealth alone. I had taught English for 40 years. I knew the character when I saw in theirs had too many adverbs and not enough truth. The first insult came disguised as charm. Virginia leaned over her glass of champagne and said, loud enough for the servers to hear, "Oh, turquoise? How brave. That color hasn't been respectable since Nixon." Laughter followed, thin and practiced. Elise joined in. "She just wanted to match the tablecloths, mother." I smiled the way old women do when they've already survived worse. I had, after all. If words could bruise, I would have been black and blue long before tonight. I glanced toward David, waiting for him to defend me the way he used to when kids teased him at school. He only smiled, eyes lowered to his wine. His silence was a verdict, and I understood then I had become background noise in my own son's life. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button at us. Keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. The dinner continued, each toast a little louder, each laugh a little crueler. They spoke about honeymoons, investments, and new beginnings, as though age itself were contagious and I had brought it with me. I tried to focus on the candles flickering above the table, but Virginia's voice kept slicing through the air. "Such a lovely ceremony," she said sweetly. "I suppose it's generous of you, Helen, to let go of the old house at last." My fork paused mid-air. "Let go?" I asked, soft but clear. "Well, surely David will take over the deed now," she continued. "A young couple shouldn't have to start their life in debt when the old guard is sitting on equity." I folded my napkin slowly, pressing the corners into a perfect square. "The old guard still pays her own bills," I said, "and her house still stands without help." Virginia's smile tightened like a bowstring. "How quaint," she said. Elise snorted. "Mother, stop. It's her day tookened of." The laughter returned, brittle and shallow. I felt it settle into my bones the way humidity settles into old wood. I had taught hundreds of students how to use words with grace, but no one teaches you how to endure them when they turn sharp. Then came the moment that sealed everything. The band began to play a slow waltz. Virginia lifted her wineglass Bordeaux, dark as accusation, and called for a toast. "To new family," she declared, raising it high. As she leaned across me to clink glasses with a friend, her wrist tilted just enough to send the wine spilling straight down my chest. The red spread through the turquoise like blood through water. "Oops," she said, voice dripping with amusement. "She looks festive now." The laughter roared, a wave crashing over me while I stood still in its center. David's eyes flickered to me, then away. "She's fine," he said with a grin. "She's tougher than she looks." I didn't move. My hands found the napkin on the table, and I dabbed gently at the silk, one spot at a time. The room smelled of roses, perfume, and red wine. I looked at Virginia and smiled not wide, just enough to make her uneasy. "Red looks better on conscience than on silk," I said. The table went quiet for a breath, then filled with awkward laughter again. I excused myself before anyone could stop me. Inside the powder room, the mirror showed me what they had Medea woman painted in shame and patience. The stain had already set. No water could wash it out now. I stood there, watching it deepen, watching myself refuse to cry. They thought it was just a spill. They didn't see what they had awakened. I pressed a hand to the counter, feeling the pulse steady beneath my skin. They thought they spilled wine. They didn't know they spilled my patience. The morning after the wedding, the house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Elise had insisted I move in just until we figure things out. Her smile didn't match her words. It was stretched too thin, like paint covering cracks. "Of course she can stay," she said sweetly, glancing at David. "It's her house, technically." That last word hung in the air like a hook, catching on something sharp inside me. I didn't argue. I packed my things from the guest house and took the small upstairs room near the window. I taught myself long ago that silence makes people show their true shape faster than questions ever could. For a few days, I moved quietly through their world, setting the table, folding laundry, cooking breakfast, while they scrolled through their phones. They never said thank you. Elise would smile at me like one smiles at a well-trained pet. David, my son, kept his tone polite but distant, as though every word cost him pride. One evening, while I cleared the dinner plates, I heard Elise's voice from the living room. She spoke the way some women do when they're planning a future that doesn't include you. "That property could save your business," she said, her tone low but hard. "It's just sitting there collecting dust and pity." David exhaled. "Elise, we've been over this. You owe the bank nearly $200,000, she said sharply. "Are you going to fix that by teaching ethics to your mother? Sell the house, David. Or at least refinance it. She'll sign whatever you hand her. She always trusts you." The words cut through me cleanly, without ceremony. I froze by the sink, water running over my fingers. David's voice followed, tired, frustrated. "Mom's old-fashioned. But she'll come around once I explain. It's for taxes. She'll believe that." They were right about one thing. I did trust him once, enough to raise him alone after his father's heart gave out in the middle of harvest season. Enough to work 2 jobs so he could go to college, to skip new dresses so he could buy new books. I trusted him with my future because I thought I had built his conscience. Now, listening from the kitchen doorway, I understood that love and trust are not the same thing. I turned off the faucet quietly. The room behind me filled with Elise's laughter, that brittle sound that never reached her eyes. "You'll see," she said. "She'll sign. They always do." I wiped my hands, straightened the towel, and walked to my room without a word. I had learned that the loudest answer is often no answer at all. "They're counting profit," I thought as I closed my door. "I'm counting character." That night, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one that still smelled faintly of my husband's cologne, old leather, and cedar oil. Inside were the things no one else valued: his cufflinks, a stack of lesson plans from my teaching days, and the manila envelope that held the deed to the house. My name was still there, written in neat, black ink: Helen Grace Caldwell. I traced the letters with my fingertip. I remembered the night we signed it together, the way he smiled and said, "This house will be your anchor, Helen. Promise me you'll never let anyone take it from you." I had promised. Now I realized promises aren't about words, they're about memory, and mine had never failed me. I set the deed aside and pulled out my old address book, the one I hadn't opened in years. Its pages were yellowed and soft from time. I flipped through the names until I found it: June Langley. I hadn't thought of her in so long. She'd been one of my brightest students, quiet, analytical, always staying after class to ask about mortgages, interest, and how people lose their homes. Her mother had once been evicted after her father gambled away their savings. I remembered her crying in my classroom, clutching a torn eviction notice. I had given her lunch, then a ride home. Later, I helped her apply for a scholarship. Now, decades later, I dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before a calm, professional voice answered. "Langley Appraisals, this is June." I hesitated. "June, this is Helen Caldwell. You might not remember me." There was a pause, then a gasp. "Mrs. Caldwell, I could never forget you." Her warmth softened the edges of my resolve. "You were one of the best," I said. "Now, I need the kind of help only a smart woman can give." "Tell me what's wrong," she said. "My son and his wife want to refinance my house. They think I'm too old to understand paperwork. Another pause, this one longer, heavier. Then let's make sure they underestimate the wrong person. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Good. I could use someone who still believes in math that tells the truth. I'll come by this week, she promised. No one needs to know why. When I hung up, I felt the kind of calm that comes right before a storm, the moment when the air shifts and the birds go silent. I tucked the deed back into its envelope, then slid it under a loose floorboard. From the window, I could see Elise on the patio, holding her phone to her ear, pacing in heels too high for the truth she was walking toward. David stood beside her, his shoulders tense, the posture of a man already owned by regret. They thought I was slow, harmless, an accessory to their plans. But I had built that house brick by brick, memory by memory. I knew every corner better than they ever would. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own face, older, lined, but unbroken. Patience has texture, I realized. It feels like polished wood, smooth on the surface, but carved from something that once resisted every blade. Tomorrow, they would keep scheming. But tonight, I had the deed, the silence, and a plan beginning to take shape. I turned off the lamp and whispered into the dark. You wanted my trust, David. Now you'll learn what it costs to lose it. I didn't sleep that night. But by morning, my plan had a name, and it was June Langley. The knock came late Tuesday morning, steady and polite. I opened the door expecting a stranger in a business suit. Instead, sunlight revealed a familiar face, older now, framed by chestnut hair and confidence. Mrs. Caldwell, she said softly. June Langley, from Natchez High. I stared a second too long before the years caught up. June Langley, I breathed. Well, you've grown into your name, haven't you? She smiled the way people do when gratitude lives just beneath their composure. You called about an appraisal. I stepped aside to let her in. Yes, though I didn't expect it to be you. Behind us, Elise's heels clicked like small irritations across the hardwood floor. Oh, how sweet, she said. An old teacher reunion. Then, looking at June, she added with that honeyed malice of hers, Don't mind the smell. Old houses and old women decay the same way. June didn't flinch. Some things age, she said evenly, turning to face her. Some rot. There's a difference. Elise's lips tightened, but she said nothing. David entered just then, carrying a folder thick enough to hold secrets. You're the appraiser? He asked June, offering his hand. Yes, she replied. Langley Appraisals. I was told you wanted a full valuation for potential refinancing. He nodded quickly, already selling a version of the truth. We just want to know what we're working with. You know how the market is. June's tone was calm, professional. I do. As they moved through the living room, she took notes on her tablet, her eyes sweeping over the crown moldings, the old oak floors, the faint watermark near the ceiling where the roof once leaked. I followed quietly, pretending to be the kind of old woman they thought I wassalant, harmless, decorative. Elise trailed behind, commenting on every detail as if she were auditioning for ownership. We're thinking of knocking down that wall, she said. Modernizing the kitchen, maybe removing the old wallpaper. It's so sentimental. June raised a brow. Sentimental things often hold their value. David chuckled awkwardly. We just want it to feel like ours. I stood behind him, close enough for him to hear when I murmured, It already isn't. He pretended not to notice. Halfway through the inspection, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, jaw tightening. Excuse me, he said, stepping outside to take the call. Elise followed, whispering something sharp as the door closed behind them. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. June turned to me, her expression shifting from professional to protective. He asked me for transfer documents, she said quietly. Something he called a temporary authorization. He said you'd be signing soon. My pulse didn't even quicken. And what does that document really do? It gives him control of the property until it's properly refinanced, she said. It's worded to sound harmless, But once you sign, he could sell the house outright. I nodded slowly, the air between us thick with something deeper than anger. Then we'll make sure every word he forges becomes evidence. June's eyes softened. You always did have a way with sentences. I smiled faintly. Words can ruin or rescue. Depends who's holding the pen. She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. You might not remember, but when my mother left my father, you took us in for 3 weeks. You said, no one deserves to be homeless from someone else's mistake. You gave her shelter when no one else would. I remember, I said. You brought me flowers the day you moved out, dandelions from the schoolyard. She laughed quietly. We didn't have much else to give. Then, with sudden seriousness, you gave my mother safety. Let me return that favor with justice. For a moment, the years folded neatly between us teacher and student, now equals standing on opposite sides of the same lesson. We heard footsteps returning. June straightened, her voice once again neutral, her tablet raised. The structure is sound, she said as David re-entered. But I'll need to confirm the documentation before submitting the final report. Elise reappeared behind him, face tight. Do you always take this long? June smiled politely. Quality takes time. David, trying to mask impatience, handed her a thin envelope. Here's everything you need. June accepted it, her thumb brushing the edge. I'll review it carefully. They walked her to the door, all courtesy and false warmth. I followed, my pace slow but deliberate. Outside, the afternoon light softened the house's flaws, making even decay look graceful. June turned to me as she reached her car. I'll get a copy of whatever he's drafting, she said under her breath, and I'll send it to you. Don't sign a single thing. I won't, I said. Not even my silence. She smiled faintly. Then they've already lost. I watched her car disappear down the road, her taillights blinking once like a promise. Behind me, Elise's voice echoed from the porch. What did she say? Just technical stuff, I replied. She'll finish soon. Elise looked unconvinced. Good. I don't want her poking around too long. This house gives me chills. It gives what it receives, I said. Maybe it's just returning the favor. That night, I stood by the same window where I had watched them plot, the moonlight falling in silver lines across the floorboards my husband once polished by hand. I could still hear the faint echo of Virginia's laughter from the wedding, the sound of red wine splashing against silk. The humiliation had dried, but the memory hadn't faded, it had only hardened, like a seal on a letter not yet sent. Now, I had an ally, a woman who owed me nothing yet offered everything I'd once given freely. In the quiet, I whispered to the house itself, You've seen everything, haven't you? Then watch a little longer. The walls didn't answer, but the wood creaked softly, as if agreeing. And for the first time since the wedding, I slept without bitterness, only calculation. June called me 2 days later, her tone brisk but urgent. Mrs. Caldwell, I checked the zoning registry. Your property sits squarely inside the historic preservation zone. If you file for status under that clause, every sale or mortgage is legally frozen until the registered owner passes away. No transfer, no refinancing, no loopholes. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, watching the magnolia branches sway outside the kitchen window. And if I do that, June? She hesitated only a beat. Then they can't touch it. Not a single brick. The law would be on your side permanently. Then let's make history official, I said. That afternoon I drove into town to see Thomas Avery, my late husband's closest friend and one of the last honest lawyers I knew. His office hadn't changed in decades, same oak desk, same dusted law books, same faint smell of tobacco and lemon polish. He rose when I entered. Helen Grace Caldwell. I wondered when the storm would bring you in. I seem to have a talent for storms. Sit, he said, gesturing toward a chair that looked like it had survived more confessions than most churches. Tell me everything. So I did. The wedding, the wine, the whispers about refinancing, the false warmth in Elise's smile. He didn't interrupt, just listened, fingers steepled, eyes narrow with thought. When I finished, He leaned back and said quietly, "If you sign, you lose. If you stay silent, you win." "Then I'll stay silent," I said. He nodded. "I'll draft the preservation application myself. It's clean, airtight. Once it's filed, that house becomes a monument untouchable. But you'll need proof of their intent if they push further." "I already started collecting," I said. By the time I returned home, the plan had turned from idea to motion. June was right there. Greed had given me structure. I began recording every conversation, leaving my phone near the dinner table when they talked. I copied Elise's emails from the family computer, the ones she thought I was too old to check. One message to a realtor read, "She's nearly 80, confused about paperwork. Once she signs, we'll move fast." Another to a friend, "The house will sell for 7 figures. I'll finally breathe again." I saved them all. Truth, I've learned, doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be documented. Days later, it happened. David knocked softly on my bedroom door, the kind of knock people use when they think they're being kind but are really being deceitful. He stepped in, holding a folder and a pen. "Mom, do you have a minute?" I closed my book and looked up. "Of course." He smiled the way children do when they're about to lie. "It's just a quick thing, some temporary authorization papers for the bank, a tax adjustment form. They said we need your signature to keep the property's assessment current." I watched his hands. They trembled slightly, not from guilt, but from pressure. Elise's reflection flickered behind him in the hallway mirror. She was pretending not to listen, but her posture was too still. I took the folder and unfolded the papers slowly. The lines of text were neat, deliberate, every word positioned to appear harmless. I'd spent my life grading essays. I could spot manipulation in language better than anyone. The phrase "temporary authorization" repeated 3 times, always next to my name. I looked up. "Just taxes?" "Right," he said quickly. "Nothing changes ownership." My voice was calm, almost kind. "Then you won't mind if I read it first?" He hesitated, then forced a laugh. "Mom, come on, it's late. I need to send it off tonight." "Then bring me a pen," I said. He handed it to me, relief flooding his face. I gripped it loosely, letting my hand shake just enough to look frail. The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line. Then, slowly, I dragged it across the page but not on the line. I signed just above it, off-center, the ink slicing through white space like a hairline crack in glass. "There," I said softly. "Signed, but not where you wanted." He blinked. "Mom, you missed the line." I smiled. "You said I was old, David. I suppose my aim's gone." He chuckled uneasily, gathering the papers. "I'll fix it later." When he left, the sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway, but the echo of what he'd lost lingered behind him. I picked up the small recorder from my nightstand and stopped the tape. Every word was capture his request, his tone, his deception, proof of intent, as Thomas had called it. I slipped the recorder back into the drawer beside the flash drive holding Elise's emails. My arsenal was quiet, invisible, legal. That night, I opened the window and let the air in. The house breathed with me, the wood creaking softly, like approval. Patience, I thought. Justice wears slow shoes. Tomorrow, I would file the preservation papers with Thomas. Tomorrow, the walls that had heard my humiliation would become witnesses under the law. And when the time came for signatures and consequences, mine would already be in the right place, just not where they wanted it. The table was set as if for celebration, crystal glasses, candles glowing against the polished wood, the smell of roasted lamb drifting through the air. Elise had arranged it all, down to the embroidered napkins and the silver cutlery she had bragged about polishing herself. It was the kind of dinner where everyone pretends the food tastes better than the tension. David poured the wine, his smile stretched too wide. "It's a big night," he said. "A buyer's already shown interest. We might finally be able to move forward." Elise leaned toward him, eyes glinting with the satisfaction of someone who believed she'd already won. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "And the end of old burdens." The word burdens hung in the air like perfume that had turned sour. I didn't lift my glass. I watched the candlelight bend against the rim instead, the reflection trembling as if it, too, knew something ugly was being celebrated. New beginnings built on lies, I said quietly. End before dessert. Elise's hand froze mid-air. David chuckled too loudly, desperate to diffuse the silence. She's confused, he said quickly. Ignore her. Ignore her, Elise repeated, her smile tightening. That seems to be her favorite pastime, doesn't it? I said nothing more. The lamb was tender, but it might as well have been ash. I ate slowly, deliberately, memorizing the way they spoke over me how. Elise's laughter filled the spaces my words no longer reached, how David nodded to her like a man already owned. They had no idea the real meal was already being served elsewhere on paper, inked and signed, waiting for morning. After dinner, Elise lit another candle and poured more wine. It feels good to finally move on, she said, looking around the dining room as though it were already someone else's. I think we'll take the art but leave the furniture. The buyer wants the historic aesthetic. I folded my napkin neatly. You mean my furniture, my house, my name on the deed? She tilted her head, voice soft but venomous. Technically, yes, but that's just paperwork. Family should share. I looked directly at her, the kind of stare that had once made misbehaving students confess without a word. Sharing isn't when you take something and pretend it's yours. David's fork clinked against his plate. Mom, please, this is supposed to be a good night. For whom? I asked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The laughter that followed felt rehearsed, a brittle performance held together by greed. Elise kept touching his hand, whispering plans about after the sale, about new decor and fresh starts. She even mentioned repainting the front door of their imaginary new home. The details made it real for them. That was the part that almost made me pity them almost. I stayed until dessert, until Elise made one last toast to progress, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I raised my empty glass, the way one raises a flag before surrender. To progress, I said softly. May you both enjoy it while it lasts. That night, the house fell into silence. From my room upstairs, I could hear them laughing again, their muffled voices tangled with the hum of music from David's phone. I sat at my desk beneath the small lamp, its light pale against the darkness. In front of me were the pieces of their undoing, the recordings, the fake emails, the forged authorization with my misplaced signature, and the appraisal notes June had slipped into an envelope marked evidence. Each item represented a truth they thought I was too old to recognize, too weak to fight. But patience, when paired with proof, becomes a weapon that doesn't miss. I opened a fresh envelope and began to assemble everything carefully, page by page. The first packet went to the Chatham County Office of Land and Property, the second to the State Bureau of Historic Preservation. My letter was short and precise, the way justice ought to be. To whom it may concern, I believe there has been an attempt to falsify documents and coerce the transfer of protected property under my ownership. Enclosed are all relevant materials for your review. Respectfully, H.G.C. I signed only my initials, nothing more, nothing less. When I sealed the envelope, I felt the faint tremor of release, not triumph, not vengeance, just inevitability. I placed both envelopes into the outgoing mail, slid them through the brass slot of the old front door, and listened for the quiet sound of paper landing on tile. That soft thud was my declaration of war delivered not in anger, but in order. Upstairs, I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The moonlight spilled across the floorboards, silvering every groove and nail my husband once laid by hand. I whispered to the empty air. They wanted my silence. I'm giving them the truth signed in red. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the magnolia leaves against the window pane. It sounded almost like applause. 3 days later, the morning air felt heavier than usual. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when I heard the sound of an envelope tearing open in the next room. Then came silence's harp, brittle silence, the kind that means something irreversible has arrived. David's voice broke it first. What the hell is this? His chair scraped hard against the floor. I stayed where I was, stirring sugar into my cup. Elise came running from the hallway, her robe half-tied, a smear of mascara under one eye. "Another overdue notice?" she asked, half mocking, half afraid. David didn't answer. His eyes scanned the letter again, the color draining from his face. "It's from the County Office of Land and Property," he said. His voice cracked. "They've frozen the house." Elise frowned. "Frozen? What do you mean, frozen?" He read aloud, stumbling over every word. "Effective immediately, due to allegations of elder coercion and fraudulent authorization, the property at 219 Maple Grove is under state investigation. All transactions are suspended pending review." The kettle began to whistle behind me. I turned off the flame, calm as still water. "Elder coercion?" Elise repeated, laughing nervously. "That's insane. Who would even?" Her eyes found mine across the kitchen. The laughter stopped. "You." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Me? I'm just decoration, remember?" David looked at me like a man seeing the end of a road he had paved himself. "Mom," he whispered, "what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just told the truth. The law did the rest." Before either of them could speak, the crunch of tires echoed from the driveway, then the sound of car doors slamming, heavy footsteps on gravel. Elise ran to the window, pulled the curtain, and gasped. "It's the police," she whispered. I set my cup down. Then it must be important. The knock came firm and official. David opened the door to two uniformed officers and a man in a gray suit, Thomas Avery. He held a file in one hand and a court seal in the other. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," one of the officers said, "we have a warrant to search the premises in connection with a complaint of elder financial coercion and document falsification." "This is insane," Elise cried. "We didn't do anything wrong." Thomas's voice was low but unyielding. "Then you won't mind cooperating." He handed David the warrant, then another folder. "Inside this," he said, "are copies of emails sent under your name to several real estate agents, along with a forged authorization form bearing your mother's signature. Slightly misplaced, but still legally binding enough to show intent." David stared at the papers, speechless. Thomas turned to Elise. "And Mrs. Caldwell, we have text messages between you and your mother, Mrs. Virginia Carver. You discussed splitting proceeds from the sale once the transfer cleared. We also have wire records 3 payments from your mother's account labeled as advance investment. Care to explain?" Elise's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just then, her phone buzzed violently on the counter. She snatched it up, glanced at the screen, and froze. Virginia's voice erupted through the speaker, loud and shrill. "What the hell is going on, Elise? My accounts are being audited. They're saying I'm part of some fraud case. Fix this or you're finished." Elise's fingers trembled. "Mother, please, The officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll need that phone." When she refused, he took it gently but firmly from her grasp. The room filled with the clicks of cameras, the shuffle of paper, the weight of consequence settling over every inch of air. Thomas looked at me and nodded once. "Mrs. Caldwell, everything you submitted checks out. The preservation order is active, and the investigation is now official." Elise clutched the edge of the table, her face pale. "Who reported us?" she demanded. "Who sent those documents?" I met her eyes, a woman who was tired of watching good houses rot. David sank to his knees, voice breaking. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked down at him, not angry anymore, only certain. "You meant to win," I said softly. "You just forgot what game I play." He dropped his head into his hands. Elise backed toward the wall, her breathing quick and shallow. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "You wouldn't destroy your own son." "Destroy?" I said. "No, I protected what was mine. You destroyed yourselves." Then came another voice, Virginia's, echoing faintly from Elise's phone, still on speaker. "Please, Mrs. Caldwell," she cried, her tone desperate now. "Don't drag me into this. I can fix it, I swear. Just please don't destroy us. I turned toward the sound, my voice quiet but sharp enough to end every plea. I didn't destroy you, Virginia. I just let the law write down what you did. The officers moved forward then, reciting rights, collecting evidence. Flashbulbs from the reporters outside burst through the windows bright, merciless. One headline would read the next morning: Southern couple and socialite under elder fraud probe. By the time they led David and Elise out the front door, the house was silent again. I stood in the doorway, my hand resting on the frame my husband once carved. David looked back one last time, his eyes hollow. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "You're sorry you lost." Virginia's voice crackled faintly through the still open line. "Please, Mercy." I ended the call with a single press. "Mercy," I murmured. "That's what this is." Outside, the officers closed the car doors. The engines started. Gravel shifted under their tires as they pulled away, taking greed and guilt with them. Inside, the house exhaled, its walls quiet again. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window. Justice doesn't roar. It arrives like morning slow, certain, and impossible to stop. The trial was swift 5 days, 6 witnesses, and a mountain of evidence too solid to deny. I sat in the second row of the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, the way I used to sit at church when I still believed prayers could rewrite character. David avoided my eyes through most of it, staring at the table like a man waiting for a verdict he'd already pronounced on himself. Elise sat stiff beside him, her jaw clenched, dressed in gray as if trying to disappear into her own guilt. Virginia came only once, wearing black and pearls again, though this time the pearls looked heavy, strangling rather than shining. When the judge read the sentence, his voice carried no malice, just the dry finality of truth. David Caldwell 5 years in state prison for financial fraud and elder coercion. Elise Carver Caldwell revocation of real estate license and permanent ban from property brokerage. Elise gasped, as if her breath had just learned what accountability felt like. Virginia wasn't mentioned until later, when the court ordered her assets seized as part of an investigation into wire fraud and money laundering. By the week's end, her estate was gone, her accounts frozen, her so-called reputation shattered. The newspapers had their feast. One headline read, "The widow who outsmarted the South." Another called me the woman who turned silence into a weapon. I didn't read most of them. I'd lived long enough to know that public admiration is just gossip with better grammar. Neighbors whispered, "Of course they always do." At the grocery store, Mrs. Faulkner from 2 streets over patted my arm and said, "Guess that wine was prophetic, huh?" I smiled. "I suppose it was," I said. "It just took a while to stain the right fabric." The house, once full of deceit and polished lies, now sat quiet under the magnolia trees. Reporters had trampled the lawn, photographers had flashed their lights against its windows, and yet somehow it still looked the same. I walked through it one last time, past the dining room where I'd been humiliated, the kitchen where I'd kept my silence, and the hallway where my patience had finally bloomed into strategy. Henry had built this house with his own hands. Every nail carried his patience. I paused in the doorway of my bedroom and whispered to the air, "You kept your promise, Henry. The house never betrayed me. People did." The deed was still mine, untouched. But ownership no longer felt like victory. It felt like history, a heavy kind of belonging. I didn't want to live among the echoes anymore. So I made a decision. I listed the house for selling out to profit, but to release. When the young couple came to see it, I watched them walk through the rooms with awe, their small daughter trailing her fingers along the banister Henry had carved. They reminded me of who we once were, hungry for peace, not power. When they made an offer, far below market value, I accepted without hesitation. The realtor blinked, surprised. "You could easily get double, Mrs. Caldwell," she said. I smiled. "A home that's been used for cruelty deserves laughter again. Let them fill it with noise I can't make anymore." She nodded, maybe not understanding, but sensing that the conversation was over. The day I handed over the keys, I walked through each room one final time. The walls no longer felt like witnesses, they felt like old friends I was releasing from duty. On the mantel above the fireplace, I left a single envelope addressed to the new owners. Inside was a note written in my careful, steady script. Treat this house with kindness, it remembers. With the sale complete, I bought a small cottage on the edge of the river, 2 miles outside of town. It was quiet, their whitewashed walls, creaking floorboards, and wide windows that caught the light just right at dawn. I planted rows of lavender along the fence, the same kind Henry once promised to grow but never did. Each morning, I walked to the riverbank with my tea, the water rippling soft against the stones. The world finally sounded the way I wanted it, Toslow, honest, unhurried. I began to write again, not letters this time, but pages of reflection-small entries in a leather-bound journal. Some days I wrote about the house, some days about forgiveness. Most days I wrote about the strange relief of letting go. When the lavender bloomed, their scent filled the air sharp, clean, and alive. I didn't feel triumphant anymore, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've survived the worst version of love and still have enough left to plant something new. One evening, as the sun slipped into the water, I looked at my reflection and realized that for the first time in years, I saw no trace of humiliation in my eyes, only peace. Justice had its cost, but silence had its price too. And I had paid it, every last word of it, until nothing remained except the truth and a garden that finally knew laughter again. A year can pass quietly when peace finally learns your address. The mornings here come soft, with the slow hum of cicadas and the smell of lavender pressing against the open window. I wake before the sun most days, make tea, and listen to the river breathing outside the cottage. It has its own rhythm, steady, certain, unbothered by what came before. My hands have grown slower, but not weak. I've learned that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the ability to hear only what matters. The silence in this little house is kind. It doesn't watch me the way the old one did. It doesn't hold memories that cut when touched. It just lets me be. Yesterday, the mail arrived later than usual. I almost didn't check it. Bills, advertisements, the usual noise of paper pretending to matter. But among them was an envelope written in the unsteady hand of age. No return address, just my name. Inside was a letter. Dear Mrs. Caldwell, I read about what you did in the paper last year. My son tried to take my house too. Because of your case, my lawyer stopped him. You saved me without knowing it. Thank you. With love, Helen M., age 78. I read it twice, then held it against my chest. The irony of our shared name didn't escape me. I smiled and wrote back that night, my handwriting slow but certain. Dear Helen, I didn't fight to inspire. I fought to exist. That was enough. Take care of your home and yourself. They are the same thing, really. With quiet strength, Helen G. Caldwell. I left the envelope by the door for the postman to collect in the morning. When I stepped outside, the evening smelled like rain but felt forgiving. A few days later, June came to visit. She looked different now, confident, successful, softer in the eyes but stronger in the shoulders. Time had been kind to her, and she had earned every ounce of that kindness. She brought lemon muffins and 2 cups of coffee, then leaned against the porch railing, watching the river. You've made this place your own, she said. I suppose I have, I replied. It doesn't remember pain. She was quiet for a moment, then, carefully, do you ever miss the old house? I looked out toward the horizon where the sunlight hit the water. No, I said finally. Some walls echo too loud. I needed quiet. June smiled. You found it. I did, I said. And it doesn't ask anything of me. We sat there for a while, not speaking, just listening to the world exist. Silence, I'd learned, was a fluent language between women who had endured too much noise. When she left, I stayed on the porch, watching her car disappear down the road lined with oak trees. The air shimmered faintly with the scent of lavender and river water. I brewed another pot of tea and carried it outside, letting the cup warm my palms. That's when I saw eat a small brown sparrow perched on the railing, head tilted, eyes curious but unafraid. It stayed there for a long time, just watching me, the way living things do when they sense they're safe. "You're brave," I said softly. "Most things that fly don't come back." It hopped once, then twice, pecked at a crumb of muffin I'd left behind, and fluttered onto the edge of the porch. For a moment, it seemed to listen. Then it lifted into the air, wings cutting through the light like forgiveness made visible. I watched until it vanished into the trees, then looked down at the empty railing. "They called me decoration," I whispered. Maybe I was. I held what mattered, and when it was time, I smiled. I let go. The sun sank low, brushing gold across the cottage walls. Inside, the clock ticked softly, marking time that no longer hurt to count. I sat in my chair, tea cooling beside me, heart steady. This house didn't creak the way the old one did. It didn't remember betrayal, it just breathed with Meslo, calm, alive. And for the first time in my life, so did I. And that, my dear listeners, is how it ended quietly, the way storms should. No shouting, no revenge, just truth, standing tall where lies once lived. If my story reached you, if it reminded you that silence can be strength and dignity, its own kind of justice, then my voice has done its job. Thank you for listening, for feeling, for staying. And if you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support keeps voices like mine alive, voices that remember, forgive, and still find peace. This is Grandma, signing off with love, courage, and quiet victory.